Welcome to the Vinicius Studio podcast, where music, stories, timeless art, and resonant ideas help us live better, think deeper, and feel more alive. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. This is Vinicius Barbosa Pipa. I'm a composer and songwriter, a professor at Berklee College of Music Online, and an Emmy nominee. So today's episode, a little bit of a different speed than some of the other stuff you've been hearing here so far. Usually you get my chipper self, with positive and hopeful takes on stuff and all that. Now, this episode, I'm talking about something that to me is very serious, which is this topic of technology, right? Not just the technology that we are encountering on our phones and with algorithms and social media and so on, but also this AI technology that it's not the new kid on the block anymore. It's been around for a little bit now, and we understand it a little bit better. And what I want to do here is a little bit deeper of a dive than maybe you get on a more surface level analysis of AI itself and how it's affecting us, specifically in the creative field, but also in other spheres of life. And just a spoiler alert is that it's not good. And I want to see if we can not only understand it, wrap our minds around it, but also find ways to overcome it in a sense and aim up as we're doing all kinds of things. And this technology seems to be more and more imposing on us. Okay, so let's dive in, and thank you again for joining. Let's start the podcast with a reading. I read a lot as a child. After my fantasy reading period, it was the poets who opened up the world for me, and a lot of them, I began to notice in the centuries between Wordsworth and Merwin, were gesturing in some way towards the same thing, this machine. Later, I found that novelists had been writing about it as well, from Mary Shelley to Aldous Huxley, via George Orwell, E.M. Forster, and Ursula Le Guin. The filmmakers, meanwhile, had been on the case, from Metropolis to The Matrix. As for the non-fiction writers, they had been pouring forth great tomes on this force for over a century. In other words, this was not a new story. This triumph of the mechanical over the natural, the planned over the organic, the centralized over the local, the system over the individual and the community. This was the tale of our time. As this machine rose around them, all of these writers tried to pin it down in words. Many succeeded, and yet we are still here, trying to work out what is going on and what to do about it, and what it quite means. All we know is that some force has been unleashed in our world, which we are struggling to contend with. A huge change is birthing itself. A change in our human relationship with nature, with each other, with our past, with our tools, with everything. So this is from the introduction of Paul Kingsnorth's new book, Against the Machine. I think it will frame nicely the conversation that I want to have in today's episode. As you may know, one of my goals with this podcast is to help you navigate the world we live in, this moment in culture, by leaning on the wisdom of great minds and the beauty of great hearts, both past and present. When I say great minds, I'm thinking philosophers, theologians, and the thinkers who have shown us how to see the world. And when I say great hearts, I mean the artists, the writers, the musicians, the painters, and the filmmakers whose work has moved us, inspired us, and awakened something deep within us. These minds and hearts have lit the way for me, and I believe they can do the same for all of us today. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because one topic that I will probably return to very often on this show is the relationship between humanity and technology. We are living in a world that's completely saturated with it, if you haven't noticed, but I'm sure you have. Devices, algorithms, screens, data, information flooding into our lives faster than we can possibly process. Now, we all use technology every single day, something as simple as taking a shower or wearing shoes or driving a car. These are simple usages of technology. So it means that something doesn't have to have a screen and a battery for us to call it technology. However, the topic that I'm going to be focusing on this episode, and probably a lot in this podcast, is digital technology. And I specifically am looking at artificial intelligence, of course, and this algorithm-driven hyperconnectivity that seems to be shaping so much of our lives, right? You know what I mean? It's the social media, it's the algorithms, it's the all of these convenient things that are listening, that we're pouring our information in and are giving us information. All of these devices, all the stuff that is everywhere around us, pretty much at all times. My personal interest in all of this, especially the AI stuff, but also the relationship between humanity and technology. My personal interest in all of this comes from my own world. So that's the world of art and entertainment and creativity. As you know, I'm a professional composer and a songwriter, and I mostly work in film, in television, and in a variety of forms of media. So naturally, I am fascinated, and I am, to be frank with you, sometimes very concerned about how these technologies are transforming creative work. But even if you are not in the arts, don't tune out just yet, because this affects all of us, right? Every person in every field in every part of the world. Anyone with a device connected to the internet is, in a sense, plugged into this giant network of technologies that is reshaping how we live and how we think, right? Some people who are much smarter than me, including Paul Kingsnorth, have started calling this thing the machine, which refers to this cultural, technological matrix that envelops us. Okay, with that in mind, I am not yet, at least not in this episode, I'm not yet interested in passing judgment on it just yet, on this machine. I find that we very quickly rush to pass judgment on a thing before we actually understand how it operates or what it is or its core tenets, if it's an opinion or something like that. For the time being, and then the next few minutes here in this episode, I simply want to see if we can understand it better, and then we can pass judgment on it, okay? So let's start with artificial intelligence. That's what I want to focus on today for a little bit. And I want to ask ourselves two basic questions here about artificial intelligence. And remember, again, I am, at the moment, trying to analyze this mainly from the creative standpoint, how it affects creative work. Here are the two questions. Number one, how is AI different than other tech? And number two, how is it that it's affecting us? Okay, so let's start with that first question. How is AI different than other technology? Let me give you a brief framework to think about technology. To simplify things, we will talk about technology in three categories: analog technology, digital technology, and generative technology. Okay? So let me paint a picture here for you. Let's say you walk into an artist's studio way back in time before the invention of the computer. What would you see in his studio? You would see tools, physical tools, right? You would see paintbrushes, and you would see paints, and you would see canvases. You would see a variety of tools like chisels of all kinds of sizes and shapes, right? If this artist is also a sculptor. So you'll see things in the physical world, right? If you walked into a musician's studio, for example, you would see a violin or pencil and paper, a piano, etc. That is analog technology. A couple of key things about analog technology: when you use them in your work, when you use any kind of technology that's analog, the idea and the execution of any creative project both come from you, right? You touch the clay, you play the violin, you paint the canvas, you have to get your hands dirty, you have to get calluses on your fingers, so on and so forth. So that's analog technology. Hey, I'm quickly interrupting all this great stuff because if you haven't already, I invite you to join me over on my Substack page. That is kind of my headquarters. It's my hub where all of my mission operates from. So if you want to keep up with everything I'm doing, all of my projects, including music and podcasts and everything else, head over there. That's also the best place where you can support me financially. if you resonate and believe in the work that I'm doing. The way to access that is by going to musicbyvinicius.substack.com. That is musicbyvinicius.substack.com. I'm going to leave a link here in the description so you can find me. Thank you very much. And now back on with the show. The seed of the idea and the execution both come from you when you're working with analog technology. Okay, fast forward now a number of years in this hypothetical scenario of ours, and we come to the time when the computer was invented. The computer, obviously, is the tool that changed everything, not only in the creative world, obviously. Everybody else in every field ever has been affected dramatically by the invention of the computer. But of course, the field of creative arts has been massively affected by the computer. So what happens now when you use a computer to engage in creative work? Well, it's a massive convenience, right? It saves you time. It does a lot of things for you. And basically what it does is that the idea, the seed of the creative idea still comes from you. It still comes from the artist. But to simplify here, the execution of that idea is done by the computer. So again, to keep our musician analogy here, back in the day, you would have to play a violin and record it, let's say, into something. And nowadays, what you can do is you can go into a computer and you can pull up a file of a violin player, in a sense, and you can make the computer play that for you. Now that simplifies things. That makes a violin accessible to those who can't play a violin. Remember, we're not yet judging here this technology. I'm just telling you what the progression is like. But so remember here, the difference between analog and digital in one way of thinking is in analog, execution and idea, or rather idea and execution both come from you. In the digital world, the idea is still in your head and it comes from you, but then it gets executed by the computer. You see here what's happening. The quote-unquote center of the creative process starts moving from you to the machine. Now, generative technology is completely different. It takes everything to a new level. It takes digital to a new level. So when I mean generative, I'm talking about generative AI, right? So it's that kind of artificial intelligence where you can type in a prompt and the program creates for you an image or a painting or an illustration, sometimes even a piece of music, right? So you give it a prompt and it magically spits out some kind of a product. Now, remember when I talked about analog and digital, in the analog world, you were still required, as an artisan, you were still required to have a high level of technical mastery of your tools, of your craft, right? You would have to submit yourself to the painful and laborious process of acquiring that mastery with your hands, with your body, right? To become a great painter or a great musician or a great novel writer, etc. When you move to the digital world, you still are required to have a great level of mastery, at least so you can create the ideas, right? Granted, in many art forms, some of your artistry does get diminished when you translate from analog to digital. That's a given, but the trade-off is still valuable because you can produce things in a very high level and a very high quality. And in many ways, you are still working in an analog sense in a large part of the process, right? A lot of us, for example, who are musicians, we still have to learn our instrument very well so we can record it or so we can perform it live, so we can do all these kinds of things. So really, the world that we live in nowadays is an analog-digital hybrid. That's the world of the creative arts these days. But it very much lives in that tension of analog and digital. And, that's where you get all the discussions about what's better. Is analog better? Is digital better? We could talk about that another day. But that's where we live now, right? And in the digital world, you still need this high level of mastery of your craft to create anything worthwhile. So what you see with generative is that the creative person is removed entirely from the process. You can already tell in the progression from analog to digital that the creative person is pushed slightly off of the center of the process. But when you arrive at generative, the creative person is pushed entirely out of the process. So the pattern here is clear. The more convenient the tool, the less it demands from you. So how is it that all of this stuff is affecting us? Well, what sort of world do you want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where art, music, stories, beautiful things are no longer made by human beings? By people who actually understand heartbreak, loss, falling in love, forgiving someone? And then more broadly, do we want to be in a world so drenched in technological comfort that we forget what it means to struggle, to grow, to overcome anything at all? Because if we allow technology to replace everything that makes us human, we will be building our own graves. So let me put it very plainly here. Creativity, which is an integral part of what makes us human, will not survive if we don't wake up and start thinking very critically and very clearly about the kinds of tools that we're building. So not only those of us who are on the side of making these tools, but also those of us who are on the side of consuming things. The most important question to ask yourself is this: who are you? Do you want to be a human being, or do you want to be part of the machine? Before I go, let me leave you with this thought. You may have heard that technology is just a tool, that it is neutral. My friends, that is not true. Technology is never neutral. Every piece of technology carries with it an implicit value statement, every single one of them. A phone, for example, implies that you can be accessible at all times, in all places, which is why you can carry it in your pocket or your purse, and somebody can ping you at any time of the day. Do you see what I'm saying here? That is not a neutral technology, right? You can still choose how you use it, of course, but it is not neutral. I think it's time we start seeing every piece of technology this way, understanding what kinds of implicit values they are bringing into our lives, because we've ignored it for too long, and I think it's done us a lot of harm. Anyway, for now, that's what I wanted to cover about AI. In a future episode, I want to explore this. So this is one of the things I want to do here in this podcast, is exploring, like, how can we use these technologies without losing ourselves in it? How do we navigate this world where a lot of things seem to be kind of losing their spark, losing their soul, and this abundance of convenience and technological connectivity, I don't think is definitely not always doing good things for us. So how do we navigate it? It's a question that I'm very curious about, and I'm hoping that we can all go on this journey together and maybe find a better way. Until then, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you all next time.